At 38 years old, Terrell Jackson made $58,421 a year as a postal carrier for the United States Postal Service. It was an honest living, one that came with a federal pension and the quiet dignity of a uniform. It was a salary that paid the $1,250 monthly mortgage on their modest row house in Baltimore's Park Heights neighborhood, kept their 2012 Toyota Camry gassed up, and put food on the table for him, his wife Denise, and their 7-year-old daughter Zora. It was, by every measure he cared about, a good life. But on this particular Tuesday evening, at 7:13 p.m., sitting in his mother-in-law's cavernous dining room, his life was being appraised by a different metric entirely, and it was being found wanting. The room itself felt like an indictment. It was located in Margaret's sprawling Guilford estate, a $2.2 million brick behemoth that loomed over its manicured lawns like a silent stone judge. The dining table was a single, polished slab of mahogany that must have cost more than Terrell's Camry. A $15,000 Baccarat crystal chandelier dripped light onto the table, catching the facets of the water glasses and the silver of the cutlery. Margaret sat at the head of the table, a queen on her throne. She wore a deep blue St. John knit suit, an outfit that retailed for around $1,900, and a string of pearls that looked disturbingly real. Her deep brown skin was smooth, a testament to expensive skincare, and her iron-gray hair was styled in an elegant, upswept coif. Beside her, his wife Denise looked small and anxious. She was twisting a cloth napkin in her lap, her eyes darting between her mother and Terrell. She too was dressed up, in a silk dress he knew she'd bought for this specific dinner, a $600 expense she'd justified as making a good impression, though on whom, he was never sure. Terrell felt the rough texture of his own hands, the hands that sorted thousands of letters a day, resting on the fine linen tablecloth. He was wearing his best and only suit, a simple charcoal number from Men's Warehouse that had cost him $299 5 years ago for a cousin's wedding. He felt like a crow in a parliament of peacocks. "So let me be perfectly clear, Terrell," Margaret began, her voice low and dangerously calm. It was the same voice she used when correcting a caterer. "You have made a baseless, disgusting accusation against me. You have suggested, in no uncertain terms, that I have been stealing from our church, from God's house." Terrell said nothing. He just met her gaze. He had not suggested it. He had discovered it. Denise finally spoke, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Mama, maybe we can discuss this privately." "No," Margaret snapped, not taking her eyes off Terrell. "This is beyond private. This is about family. This is about loyalty, something your husband clearly knows nothing about." She leaned forward, the pearls glowing against her skin. "You work a respectable job, Terrell. You deliver the mail. It's quaint. But you do not understand the world I move in, the world of finance, of boards, of philanthropy. You see a discrepancy on a piece of paper, and your simple mind jumps to the most vulgar conclusion. The condescension was a physical thing, a pressure in the air. This was the moment it all came to a head, the culmination of weeks of silent tension and years of subtle humiliations. This was the reason for the emergency dinner, the summons he'd received that afternoon. "He has to fix this, Mama," Denise pleaded, turning to him now. "Terrell, you will apologize. Tonight. Right now. You will tell my mother you were mistaken, that you misread the documents, that you are sorry for the stress and the pain you have caused her." Terrell remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He could feel the tiny, frantic tugging on the sleeve of his suit jacket. Under the heavy mahogany table, Zora was pressed against his leg, her small hand gripping his arm. She wasn't supposed to be here, but Denise had insisted, saying, She needs to see you make this right. She needs to see you respect her grandmother. It was another layer of pressure, another turn of the screw. Margaret smiled, a thin, cruel curve of her lips. An apology is a start, but it's not enough. The damage is done. You spoke to that old fool Henderson. The rumor is already slithering through the deacon board. It requires a more public display of contrition. She stood up, gliding to the doorway of the dining room. Our guest for dessert will be arriving in half an hour. The Hendersons, the Clarks, Pastor Michael. You will wait for them in the foyer, and when they have all arrived, you will get on your knees, on the Italian marble my late husband had installed, and you will beg for my forgiveness in front of them all. The air left the room. Denise stared at her mother, her mouth slightly agape, then looked at Terrell, her expression hardening into one of grim expectation. This was it. The ultimatum. "Apologize to my mother before everyone, Terrell, or we're done," Denise said, her voice barely a whisper, but each word a shard of glass. "You kneel and you apologize, or you walk away from this family for good. From me. From Zora." He felt the little hand on his sleeve tighten. A tiny, breathless voice reached his ear, a secret just for him. "Don't say sorry, Daddy," Zora whispered, her face buried in his side. "You didn't do nothing wrong." That was it. That was the only voice that mattered. The pure, unfiltered truth from the heart of his world. He looked past his stunned wife, past his imperious mother-in-law posing in the grand archway. He felt a profound and patient calm settle over him, the quiet certainty of a man who knows his path. He gently squeezed Zora's hand under the table. He looked directly at Margaret, his expression unreadable. He said 3 words, "See you Sunday." Nobody spoke. The silence that followed was heavier than the crystal chandelier, more absolute than the polished mahogany. It was the sound of a world tilting on its axis. Margaret's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Denise just stared, her mind unable to process the quiet defiance. They had expected pleading, or anger, or capitulation. They had not expected an appointment. They had no idea what was coming. Do you believe a person's character is defined by their job or by their actions? Terrell had been asked that question in a roundabout way for his entire 10-year marriage to Denise. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And stick around to see how a simple mailman delivered a lesson in justice that no one saw coming. The life they had built in the Park Heights row house was a world away from Guilford. Their home was narrow and warm, filled with the scent of lemon cleaner and whatever Terrell was cooking for dinner. The mortgage payment of $1,250 a month was their biggest expense, a constant reminder of their budget. The walls were a testament to their life. School pictures of Zora, a framed photo from their wedding, and, everywhere, Zora's vibrant drawings, taped up with the reverence of fine art. The floors creaked. The kitchen faucet had a slow drip he'd fix every few months with a $5 washer, and the back garden was a small patch of green where he grew tomatoes and basil in the summer. It was a life built of small, tangible things. Terrell's love was an act of service. It was in the lunches he packed for Zora every morning at 6:15 a.m., a small sandwich, an apple, and a note written on a napkin. It was in the way he'd sit on the floor with her, helping her build elaborate Lego castles that cost $49.99 and were her most prized possessions. It was in the dinners he cooked most nights, simple, hearty meals of chicken and rice or spaghetti, because his shift ended at 4:30 p.m., while Denise's job as a part-time receptionist at a dental office often kept her until 6. Their life had a rhythm, dictated by his route and her schedule. But underneath the domestic normalcy, a current of dissatisfaction had always flowed from Denise, fed by the constant tributary of her mother's influence. "Did you see the new car Brenda Clark got?" Denise would ask, scrolling through her phone at the small kitchen table. "A brand new Lexus RX, the white one. It's probably $60,000. Her husband is a partner at his law firm now." Terrell, washing dishes, would just nod. "That's nice for them." His 2012 Camry, with 187,000 miles on the odometer, was parked outside. It was paid off. That, to him, was the luxury. "It's not just nice, Terrell. It's what people like us should have," she'd say. The people like us meaning her, the daughter of the wealthy Margaret. "My mother said she'd help with a down payment on something better for me. For us. We can't keep driving that old thing." The help always came with strings. When they bought the row house, Margaret had provided the $10,000 down payment. It was framed as a gift, but it was wielded as a weapon in every argument. "After all I've done for you," was the preamble to every criticism. When their water heater broke, a $1,200 expense they couldn't afford, Margaret had written a check. For months afterward, every visit came with an inspection of their home. "You really should get these floors refinished, Denise. It looks so shabby." "I gave you that money to help you get on your feet, not to let the place fall apart." The contrast was starkest during holidays. Christmas at Margaret's was an exercise in conspicuous consumption. Piles of gifts wrapped in expensive paper sat under a 12-foot tree. Zora would receive extravagant toys, a $300 dollhouse, a $250 electric scooter, that made Terrell's carefully chosen gifts of books and art supplies seem paltry. Margaret would hand Terrell an envelope containing a check for $500. "For whatever you need," she'd say, a gesture that felt less like generosity and more like charity. He would watch her give her friends' husbands bottles of $200 scotch or boxes of Cuban cigars, a clear delineation of his status. One summer, Terrell had meticulously planned a family vacation, a week of camping in the Shenandoah National Park. He'd researched campsites, planned hiking trails, and budgeted the whole trip. It would cost them around $400 for gas, food, and park fees. He presented the idea to Denise and Zora with a handmade brochure. Zora was ecstatic. Denise showed it to her mother. Margaret had laughed. A light, tinkling sound that was somehow more insulting than a shout. "Camping? Terrell? Are you serious? With the bugs and the dirt? My daughter? My granddaughter? Absolutely not." She pulled out her phone. "I have a timeshare in Hilton Head, a 3-bedroom condo on the beach. It costs me $15,000 a year in fees. I'm not using it in July. You'll go there. My treat." Denise was thrilled. Terrell felt a familiar, cold knot in his stomach. The trip to Hilton Head was miserable. He felt like a guest in his own family vacation. Margaret called twice a day to ask if they were appreciating the amenities, the golf course, the private beach club. Denise spent the week posting photos to social media, tagging the resort, hashtagging blessed. Terrell spent the week feeling like a kept man, his own modest plan for genuine family connection dismissed as inadequate. His $400 plan for togetherness was crushed by a $15,000 display of control. This was the landscape of their marriage. Terrell's quiet, steady provider role was constantly being measured against the long, powerful shadow of Margaret's wealth. Denise, caught in the middle, had long ago chosen which side offered more. She loved Terrell, he believed that, but she was addicted to the lifestyle her mother's money afforded her, and his $58,000 a year could never compete. He had no idea just how deep that addiction ran, or the illicit source that was funding it. He just knew the facade of their happy family was beginning to crack under the financial and emotional pressure, long before he ever stumbled upon the truth in the musty basement of the church. The betrayal didn't begin with the discovery of stolen money. It began years earlier in 1,000 tiny cuts, It was in the way Margaret would introduce him to her friends. "This is Denise's husband, Terrell. He's a mailman." She would say the word mailman with a slight, almost imperceptible downward tilt of her lips, as if it were a charming but slightly embarrassing hobby. The friends, women draped in $8,700 Armani suits and carrying $5,000 Chanel bags, would offer him a limp handshake and a polite, dismissive smile before turning back to Denise to ask about her latest shopping trip. It was in the constant, unsolicited advice. "Terrell, you're a handsome man," Margaret said one afternoon, looking him up and down in his USPS uniform as he arrived at her house to pick up Zora. "Have you ever thought about going back to school? Getting a business degree? You could manage something. It's never too late to make something of yourself." The implication was clear. What he was now was nothing. Denise was his wife, and in the early years, she had been his defender. "Mama, stop," she would say. "Terrell works hard. He's a good man." But over time, the defense grew weaker, replaced by a weary resignation, and then by quiet agreement. One of the worst moments had come about a year before the discovery. It was Zora's 6th birthday. Terrell had spent weeks saving up to buy her the one thing she wanted more than anything: a brand new bicycle. It was a bright pink Huffy, with streamers on the handlebars and a white basket on the front. It cost $119 at Target, a significant purchase for him. He'd hidden it in a neighbor's garage, and on the morning of her birthday, he wheeled it into the living room. Zora's shriek of pure joy was one of the best sounds he had ever heard. He spent the next hour outside on the sidewalk, holding the back of the seat, his back aching as he ran up and down the block, teaching her to ride. Her laughter echoed in the quiet morning air. Later that day, they went to Margaret's house for a family party. As Zora proudly told her grandmother about her new bike, Margaret smiled. "That's lovely, dear, but Grandma has a special surprise for you, too." She led them into the backyard. There, leaning against the stone patio, was a miniature, battery-powered Mercedes G-Wagon, a ride-on toy that cost an astonishing $450. It was pristine, white, and utterly ridiculous. Zora, being 6, was momentarily dazzled by the shiny new object. Denise clapped her hands. "Oh, Mama, you shouldn't have. It's incredible." Terrell watched as Zora climbed into the plastic car and slowly drove it in a circle on the patio. The joy from the morning, the pure, earned joy of the bicycle, seemed to evaporate in the face of this ostentatious display. Later, as they were leaving, Margaret pulled him aside. "The little bike is sweet, Terrell," she said, patting his arm. "But she deserves the best. I'm just trying to give her the things you can't." It wasn't a gift. It was a statement, a declaration that he was, and always would be, inadequate. He drove home in silence, Denise chattering beside him about how generous her mother was. When they got home, the pink Huffy was leaning against the porch rail. Zora, exhausted from the day, had already forgotten about it. Terrell felt a cold fury, a sense of utter powerlessness. He hadn't been given a gift. He had been erased. The cruelty wasn't always financial. Sometimes it was verbal, delivered with surgical precision. During a heated argument about their budget, months before the end, Denise had thrown his job in his face with a venom that shocked him. "I am sick of budgeting," she'd yelled. "I'm sick of checking price tags and driving a 15-year-old car and telling my friends I can't go on vacation because we can't afford it. I married a man who delivers mail, Terrell. My mother was right. I could have had a doctor, a lawyer. I could have had a life like hers. Instead, I have this little house, and this little life." Each word was a hammer blow. He had stood there in their small kitchen, the one where he cooked her dinner every night, and felt the foundation of their marriage crumble into dust. He didn't yell back. He couldn't. The pain was too sharp. "Is that what you really think, Denise?" he'd asked quietly. "I don't know what I think anymore." She'd sobbed. "I just want more." This was the context for his discovery. He wasn't just uncovering a financial crime. He was uncovering the secret engine that powered his wife's dissatisfaction and his mother-in-law's arrogance. The money wasn't just money. It was the fuel for the condescension, the source of the power imbalance that had systematically dismantled his confidence and his marriage. The outrage had been accumulating for a decade, a slow-burning fire. When he found the proof, it was like pouring gasoline on the embers. He finally understood that their cruelty wasn't just a character flaw. It was a necessary tool to protect a secret. And he was the one who was about to expose it all. The discovery happened on a Saturday afternoon at 4:15 p.m. on a sweltering day in late August. The air in the basement of the First Baptist Community Church was thick and still, smelling of old paper, mildew, and furniture polish. A single, bare bulb hanging from a cord cast a sickly yellow glow over stacks of old hymnals and boxes of holiday decorations. Rain lashed against the small, high window, a frantic drumming that seemed to mirror the unease in Terrell's gut. He was there as a favor. Mr. Henderson, the church's official treasurer and a retired accountant in his late 70s, had been tasked with preparing the books for a routine 5-year audit. His arthritis was acting up, and he'd asked for a volunteer to help him sort through 2 years' worth of financial records. Terrell, who respected the older man and had a free afternoon, had offered to help. "It's mostly just organizing, son," Mr. Henderson had said, his voice a warm, gentle rumble. "Making sure the weekly collection ledgers match the bank deposit slips. It's tedious, but it has to be done." So there Terrell was, sitting at a folding card table that wobbled, a tower of dusty cardboard banker's boxes beside him. Mr. Henderson sat opposite, painstakingly entering figures into a laptop that looked as old as he was. Terrell's job was simple. Take a folder for a given week, pull out the handwritten ledger sheet where the cash and checks were tallied, and match it to the carbon copy of the bank deposit slip. For the first hour, it was exactly as Mr. Henderson described. Tedious. Ledger for July 7th, 2019. Total collection, $4,120. Deposit slip for July 8th, 2019. Total deposit, $4,120. Check, check, check. His mail carrier brain, trained to see patterns, to notice when a house on his route suddenly stopped its mail, fell into a comfortable rhythm. Then he opened the folder for August 11th, 2019. The ledger was clear. The ushers had counted a total of $3,850 in the collection plates, but the deposit slip dated August 12th was for $3,100, a clean difference of $750. He stared at it. Maybe a simple mistake. Maybe a large check was recorded but deposited separately. He looked for a note, an addendum. There was nothing. At the bottom of the deposit slip, in neat cursive handwriting, was the signature of the person who made the deposit, Margaret Dubois. His heart gave a little trip. Margaret had been the church's volunteer financial secretary for years, a position of great trust. She had only recently stepped down, handing the main duties to Mr. Henderson but retaining a title of Treasurer Emeritus, which meant she still handled many of the cash deposits out of habit and convenience. He put the folder aside and picked up the next one. August 18th, 2019. Ledger, $4,200. Deposit slip, $3,500. A difference of $700. Signature, Margaret Dubois. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to pool in his stomach. He started moving faster, his hands, usually so steady, trembling slightly. He wasn't checking them in order anymore. He was hunting. He pulled out a folder from 6 months later, February 2nd, 2020. Ledger, $3,500. Deposit slip, $2,900. Difference, $600. And there it was again, that elegant, familiar signature. He felt sick. He looked over at Mr. Henderson, who was squinting at his screen, oblivious. Terrell's mind was racing, connecting dots he hadn't even realized were there. Margaret's constant casual generosity, her ability to produce a $10,000 gift for a down payment, the $450 toy Mercedes, the way she scoffed at his $58,000 salary while living a life that required multiples of that, even with her late husband's pension. He'd always assumed she was just very wealthy. He'd never considered that her wealth might be subsidized by the tithes of the congregation, by the crumpled $5 bills of elderly women and the hard-earned 10% of working families. His hands felt clammy. He discreetly slipped the deposit slips from August 11th and February 2nd into the pocket of his jeans. It felt like shoplifting. "Everything all right over there, Terrell?" Mr. Henderson asked, looking up. "Fine, just fine," Terrell said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "You know what? There's a lot here. Let me take a year's worth of these boxes home. I can go through them this week, get them all organized for you so you can just plug in the numbers. It'll be faster." Mr. Henderson beamed, his lined face crinkling with gratitude. "Son, that would be a blessing. A true blessing." "Are you sure? It's a lot to ask." "It's no trouble at all," Terrell said, already standing up and hoisting one of the heavy banker's boxes. "I've got the space for it." He loaded 3 boxes, containing 2 full years of financial records, into the trunk of his Camry. As he drove home through the rain-slicked streets of Baltimore, the weight in the trunk felt less like paper and more like a bomb. He parked in front of his row house and carried the boxes inside, one by one. He stored them in the only place he knew Denise would never look, next to his uniforms in their small bedroom closet. That night, after Denise and Zora were asleep, he took 1 box into the living room. He sat on the floor, the same spot where he built Legos with his daughter, and began his own secret audit. He used a simple $10 calculator and a yellow legal pad. He worked for hours, the only sound the quiet scratch of his pen and the hum of the refrigerator. Ledger versus deposit, date by date, week by week. The numbers piled up. $750 here, $600 there, sometimes as little as $200. Sometimes during holidays like Christmas or Easter, the gap was over $1,000. It was a careful, systematic skimming. Never so much in one go that it would trigger an immediate alarm, but relentless. At 3:47 a.m., he finally stopped. He clicked the calculator one last time. He stared at the number on the little screen, his heart pounding a slow, heavy drum against his ribs. $74,350. He put his head in his hands. This wasn't just about money. This was the explanation for everything. It was the secret that had poisoned his marriage, belittled his worth, and held his wife captive. The evidence was now sitting in his closet. And the most dangerous part of it all was tucked away in his gray, government-issue postal satchel, a $75 bag that now held the key to a $74,000 lie. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he wasn't just a mailman. He was patient. He was methodical. And he was about to sort this out. The weeks that followed the discovery were the hardest of Terrell's life. He was living a double life, playing the part of the slightly beleaguered but dutiful husband, while secretly compiling a case that he knew would detonate his entire world. Every dinner was a performance. Every conversation was a minefield. The weight of the secret was immense, a physical presence he carried with him everywhere, nestled in the bottom of his mail satchel. He had to act normal. He had to be the same Terrell he had always been. The man who got up at 6 a.m., put on his blue uniform, and went to work. The man who came home, cooked dinner, and asked his wife about her day. Any change in his behavior, any hint of suspicion, would alert them, and he needed to be completely ready before he made a move. The first test came the Sunday after his discovery. They went to church, as they always did. He sat in the familiar pew, Zora between him and Denise. He watched Margaret, sitting in the front row, looking regal and pious as she listened to the sermon. During the offering, he watched the velvet-lined plates being passed down the rows. He saw people putting in their envelopes, their cash, and he felt a cold, righteous anger. He was watching a crime happen in real time. After the service, during the coffee hour in the fellowship hall, Margaret glided over to them. "Denise, darling, Terrell." She kissed the air next to Denise's cheek. "I'm heading up the new fundraiser for the youth center renovations. We need to raise $20,000. I'm counting on our family to set a powerful example." She looked pointedly at Terrell. He summoned his most placid expression. He took a sip of the weak church coffee. "That sounds like a wonderful project, Margaret," he said, his voice even. "How does the church keep track of all the cash donations for something like that? It must be complicated." It was a simple, innocent question. But he saw a flicker, a momentary tightening around Margaret's eyes. Denise shot him a look, a flash of annoyance. "Don't bother Mama with details." "Oh, we have systems, Terrell," Margaret said dismissively, waving a hand adorned with a large gold ring. "I handle the important parts. It's all very secure." She then turned her attention back to Denise, discussing a shopping trip for the following week. The moment passed, but Terrell had his confirmation. She was not just defensive, she was evasive. He had drawn a tiny drop of blood, and no one had even noticed the prick. A week later, he endured another scene. He was in the living room, helping Zora with a school project, when Denise came in, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to her mother. "I know, Mama, it's just..." "Terrell's bonus this year was only $500. It's not even enough to cover new tires," she was saying, her back to him. "I saw Brenda Clark's new car again today. That white BMW 3 Series. It's just so beautiful. It's only $43,000? Maybe if you could help with the down payment?" Terrell froze, a piece of green construction paper in his hand. He listened as Denise pleaded her case, her voice a soft, wheedling whine. He heard the muffled sound of Margaret's voice on the other end, and then Denise's face lit up. "Really?" "Oh, Mama, thank you. You are the most generous person I know." She hung up and turned to him, her eyes shining. "Guess what? Mama's going to give us the down payment for a new car. $10,000. We can finally get rid of that old wreck and get something decent." He had to force a smile. "Wow, Denise, that's great." Inside, his stomach was churning. $10,000. He knew exactly where that money was coming from. It was coming from the collection plates. It was coming from the pockets of their friends and neighbors. It was stolen, and his wife was celebrating it. The most heart-stopping moment came on a Thursday morning. He was running late for work. In his haste, he left his mail satchel, his constant companion, on the chair by the front door. He was halfway down the block when he realized it. He sprinted back to the house, his heart hammering. He burst through the door to see Denise holding the bag. "God, this thing is heavy," she said, grunting slightly as she lifted it. "What do you have in here, rocks?" He saw it in slow motion, her hand moving toward the buckle, her curiosity piqued. Inside that bag, in a large manila envelope, were the copies he had made. Dozens of deposit slips and ledger pages, neatly organized, with the discrepancies highlighted in yellow. "Just work papers," he said, his voice miraculously calm. He walked over and gently took the $75 canvas bag from her hands. New route schedules. They weigh a ton. She accepted the explanation without a second thought. Well, hurry up or you'll be late. He slung the bag over his shoulder, the weight of it both a burden and a shield. He walked out the door, his legs feeling weak. She had been inches away from discovering everything. He knew then that he couldn't wait much longer. The risk of discovery was too high, and the emotional toll of the deception was wearing him down to a nub. He was ready to make his move. He had to play dumb just a little longer. He had a meeting to schedule. Terrell knew he couldn't act alone. An accusation from a disgruntled son-in-law, a mere mailman, would be dismissed as a petty family squabble. Margaret would paint him as jealous and vindictive. Denise would back her up. He needed an ally. Someone with unimpeachable credibility within the church structure. He needed Mr. Henderson. He called the older man on a Tuesday evening, using the excuse of wanting to return the church records. They agreed to meet the next morning before Terrell's shift started. Terrell chose the location. A quiet Starbucks on Lexington Avenue. A place far from their neighborhood. A neutral ground where they were unlikely to be seen. At 7 a.m., the coffee shop was bustling with commuters, but they found a small two-person table in a corner. The air smelled of roasted coffee and burnt sugar. Terrell bought 2 black coffees, a $5.80 purchase that felt like an investment in justice. Mr. Henderson arrived a few minutes later, a tall, stooped man whose gentle eyes held a keen intelligence. His deep brown skin was lined with the wisdom of his 78 years. "Terrell, my boy." "Good to see you," he said, shaking Terrell's hand. His grip was surprisingly firm. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Henderson." They sat down. Terrell didn't waste time with small talk. He reached into his mail satchel and pulled out a thick black binder. It wasn't the kind of flimsy thing you buy for a school project. It was a heavy-duty, 3-ring binder from Staples, a $40 purchase he'd made specifically for this. He opened it on the small table. Inside, everything was perfectly organized. He had created a summary sheet on the first page. Total collections recorded, January 2019 to December 2020, $388,120. Total deposits made, $313,770. Discrepancy, $74,350. Behind the summary sheet were dividers for each month, and within each month were the documents, laid out side by side. A clean copy of the church's handwritten collection ledger on the left, and a copy of the corresponding bank deposit slip on the right. He had used a yellow highlighter to mark the differing totals, and a red pen to circle Margaret's signature on every single slip. Mr. Henderson put on a pair of reading glasses that he pulled from his breast pocket. He said nothing as he began to turn the pages. He was a retired CPA who had spent 40 years of his life auditing major corporations. He knew how to read a story, told by numbers. Terrell watched his face, saw the initial flicker of professional interest turn into a deep, sorrowful frown. He spent 10 minutes silently reviewing the documents. He would pause on a page, trace the numbers with his finger, and then slowly turn to the next. The bustling noise of the Starbucks seemed to fade into a dull roar. For Terrell, this small table had become the quiet center of the universe. Finally, Mr. Henderson closed the binder. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, his eyes closed. He let out a long, slow sigh. "I had a feeling," he said, his voice low and heavy with disappointment. "For the last year I felt it. The numbers never quite added up. The budget was always tighter than it should have been. We had to cut the youth choir's travel fund. We postponed the roof repairs." He looked at Terrell, his eyes filled with a sad understanding. "But I never wanted to believe it. It's Margaret. She helped found this church with her husband. She's a pillar. I thought I was just getting old, miscalculating." "You weren't," Terrell said quietly. "It's all there. This is meticulous, son. Mr. Henderson said, tapping the cover of the binder. Your eye for detail is a gift. You've laid it out perfectly. It's irrefutable. He paused, his gaze distant. This will break our church, or it will save it. I'm not sure which. What do we do? Terrell asked. This was the critical question. Mr. Henderson's resolve seemed to harden. The sorrow in his eyes was replaced by a steely glint. We do this by the book. No rumors, no gossip. We are a church of laws, both God's and man's. As the treasurer, I have the authority to call a special session of the deacon board to review a matter of grave financial concern. I will call that meeting. When? Soon, but we have to be strategic, Mr. Henderson said, thinking. I will call the meeting for this coming Sunday at 9 a.m. before service. I will tell them only that it's an urgent review of our finances. I will ask Margaret to be there, as treasurer emeritus. It's her right. She won't suspect a thing. She will assume it's about the budget shortfall. He looked at Terrell. And I will ask you to be there, as the person who helped compile the data. You will present your findings, just as you've shown them to me, calmly, factually. The plan was simple. It was direct. It relied on nothing but the truth. They will attack you, son, Mr. Henderson warned. They will call you a liar. They will try to discredit you. Margaret is powerful. Her voice carries weight. I'll just read the numbers, Terrell said. The numbers don't have an opinion. Good man, Mr. Henderson nodded. He pushed the binder back across the table to Terrell. You hold on to this. This is your evidence. Do not let it out of your sight. Bring it with you on Sunday. Terrell slid the binder back into his mail satchel. The bag felt heavier than ever, but it was no longer the weight of a secret. It was the weight of a reckoning. He stood up, shaking Mr. Henderson's hand again. Thank you, Terrell said. No, son, the old man replied, looking him square in the eye. Thank you. You're doing a hard thing, a right thing. Walking out of the Starbucks and into the cool morning air, Terrell felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. The plan was in motion. The end game was set. It was that very afternoon that he received the phone call from a frantic Denise, summoning him to her mother's house for dinner. The trap they thought they were setting for him, he was already walking into it willingly, armed with a $40 binder and the terrible cleansing power of the truth. The ultimatum dinner at Margaret's Guilford estate felt like a scene from a play, and Terrell knew he was the only one in the room who had read the entire script. He sat at the polished mahogany table, a silent observer of his own trial, while the prosecution laid out its flawed case. The demand for him to kneel on the $30,000 Italian marble floor was the crescendo of Margaret's arrogance. It wasn't about apology. It was about subjugation. It was a power play designed to utterly humiliate him, to break his spirit and reassert her dominance, not just over him, but over her daughter and their shared life. You have until our guests arrive, Margaret said, her voice dripping with condescension. She glanced at a ridiculously ornate grandfather clock in the corner, a piece that probably cost $25,000. That gives you approximately 24 minutes to find your humility, Terrell. Denise, now fully aligned with her mother, stood with her arms crossed. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Did you hear her, Terrell? Get on your knees. It's the only way to fix what you've done. Think about Zora. Think about what this will do to our family if you refuse. Her using their daughter's name was the cruelest blow. Zora was still hidden under the table, her small body pressed against his leg, a warm, living anchor in a cold, sterile room. He could feel her trembling. He rested his hand on her head, his fingers stroking her soft, coiled hair. This was the child safety test in its most literal form. Was his child safe, loved, and emotionally secure? In this house, with these people, the answer was a resounding no. Not as long as they were under Margaret's thumb. His actions weren't just about justice for the church, they were about liberation for his daughter. It was Zora's whisper that finally shattered his silence. "Don't say sorry, Daddy. You didn't do nothing wrong." Her breathless, innocent plea cut through all the noise, all the threats, all the years of feeling small. It was the purest form of truth. He looked up from the table, his gaze sweeping over his wife's angry face and his mother-in-law's smug one. He felt no anger. He felt no fear. He just felt a quiet, patient certainty. He had the facts. He had the plan. He had the truth on his side. Everything else was just noise. He gave Zora's hand a final, reassuring squeeze before speaking the 3 words that would seal their fate. "See you Sunday." Margaret's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in confusion. "What did you say?" "I said, see you Sunday," Terrell repeated, his voice calm and level. He pushed his chair back and stood up, reaching under the table to gently guide Zora out. "We're leaving." "You are not leaving," Denise hissed, stepping forward to block his path. "You don't get to just walk away. We are not finished here." "Yes, we are," Terrell said, looking at his wife. For the first time, he wasn't seeing the woman he loved. He was seeing a stranger, someone so blinded by the glare of her mother's money that she couldn't see the man standing in front of her. "I have to get Zora home. It's a school night." He scooped Zora up into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, her arms wrapped tightly around him. "If you walk out that door, Terrell, it's over," Denise shouted, her voice cracking. "I mean it." He paused in the grand archway of the dining room, the same spot where Margaret had stood moments before. He looked back at his wife, her face contorted with rage and disbelief. "I know," he said softly. And then he turned and walked away. He walked through the opulent foyer, past the spot on the marble floor where he was supposed to have knelt, and out the heavy oak front door into the cool night air. He didn't look back. He had an appointment to keep. The drive back to Park Heights was quiet. Zora had fallen asleep in her car seat, her small face peaceful in the glow of the streetlights. Terrell drove his old Camry, the car Denise despised, and felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. The decision had been made. The die was cast. There was no going back now, only forward. He knew the coming Sunday would be the hardest day of his life, but it would also be the first day of his freedom. How do you prepare for a battle when your only weapon is the truth? Terrell spent the next 4 days in a state of suspended animation. He went to work, sorted his mail, and delivered it with his usual precision. He smiled at the people on his route. He asked after their families. On the outside, he was the same dependable mailman. On the inside, he was a strategist preparing for war. Denise did not come home. Her side of the bed remained empty. The silence in the row house was deafening. He received a barrage of texts, which he read but did not answer. "You humiliated me. You humiliated my mother. You better not show your face at her house again. I'm staying at Mama's. Don't call me. Don't even think about it. Zora's things are here. You can pack a bag for her and I'll have someone pick it up. She needs to be with her mother." He ignored the last one. He was not letting Zora go back into that toxic environment. He took her to school each morning and picked her up each afternoon. They ate dinner together at their small kitchen table. He answered her questions as simply and honestly as he could. "Is Mommy mad at you?" she asked, pushing peas around her plate with a fork. "Mommy and I have a grown-up disagreement, sweetie," he said, "but we both love you more than anything. That never changes." He was determined to keep her safe and secure, a bubble of love in the middle of a hurricane. On Saturday, he took Zora to the park. While she played on the swings, he sat on a bench and took the black binder from his satchel. He went through it one last time, not to check the numbers, but to steel his resolve. Each highlighted figure was a small betrayal. Each signature was a testament to Margaret's greed. He thought about the roof repairs the church had postponed, the youth programs that had been cut. This wasn't just about his family, it was about his community. That evening, he laid out his clothes for the next morning. Not his Sunday best suit, the one he'd worn to the disastrous dinner. That felt tainted now. Instead, he chose a simple pair of gray trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a modest blue tie. It was the outfit of a man going to do a job, not a man going to church. He felt a strange sense of calm. He had done all he could. The rest was in God's hands, and the hands of the deacon board. Sunday morning dawned gray and damp. Rain streaked the windows of the row house. At 8:30 a.m., Terrell dropped Zora off at a neighbor's house, a kind woman who had agreed to watch her for a few hours. "Be good, sweetie," he said, kissing the top of her head. Her hair was done in two neat puffs that bounced when she moved. "Are you going to see Mommy and Grandma?" she asked, her big brown eyes searching his. "I am," he said. "I have to go talk to some people at the church." "Are you going to say sorry?" He knelt down to her level. "No, sweetie. I'm going to tell the truth. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, but it's always the right thing." She seemed to accept this. She gave him a fierce hug and ran inside to play. He arrived at the First Baptist Community Church at 8:55 a.m. The parking lot was mostly empty. He walked in through a side door that led to the administrative offices. The air was cool and smelled of floor wax and old hymnals. The conference room was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. He could hear voices inside. He paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and clutched the handle of his mail satchel. The black binder inside felt like it weighed 100 pounds. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was paneled in dark wood. A long, polished table dominated the space, surrounded by 12 high-backed chairs. Seated around the table were the 6 members of the deacon board, Pastor Michael and Mr. Henderson. And at the far end of the table, sitting side by side, were Margaret and Denise. They both looked up as he entered. Margaret's expression was one of pure, undisguised contempt. She was dressed in an immaculate cream-colored suit, a look of righteous indignation already prepared. Denise just looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. She wouldn't meet his eyes. They both clearly believed he was there to deliver the groveling apology they had demanded. They thought they had won. They had no idea the strike was just about to begin. "Mr. Jackson, thank you for coming," Pastor Michael said, his voice grave. He gestured to an empty chair opposite Margaret and Denise. "Please have a seat." Terrell walked to the chair and sat down. He placed his worn, $75 USPS satchel on the table in front of him. The room went silent. The only sound was the steady drumming of the rain against the stained glass window. The stage was set. Mr. Henderson, seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat. All eyes turned to him. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, his voice calm and authoritative. "We are here this morning to discuss a grave financial matter that has been brought to the board's attention. It involves a review of the church's financial records from the past 2 years. Margaret shifted in her seat, a look of impatience on her face. "Clarence, if this is about the budget shortfall, I've already submitted my report. We simply need to encourage more robust tithing from the congregation." "This is not about the shortfall, Margaret," Mr. Henderson said, his gaze steady. "This is about the source of the shortfall." He turned his attention to Terrell. "Mr. Terrell Jackson, a member of our congregation, volunteered his time to help me organize these records for the upcoming audit. In doing so, he uncovered a series of significant and persistent discrepancies. We have asked him here today to present his findings to the board. Terrell? A ripple of surprise went through the room. The deacons exchanged confused glances. Denise's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at Terrell. Margaret's face, for the first time, lost its smug certainty. It was replaced by a cold, hard mask of fury. What is the meaning of this? You're allowing him to speak? A mailman? On financial matters? He is a member of this church, Sister Margaret, Pastor Michael interjected, his voice firm, and he has brought forward evidence. We are obligated to hear it. Let him finish. The pastor's words hung in the air, a clear line drawn in the sand. The room fell silent again, the tension thick enough to choke on. This was the moment Terrell had been playing over and over in his mind. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the black binder. He placed it on the table and opened it with a quiet thud. He did not look at his wife or his mother-in-law. He looked at the faces of the deacons, men and women he had known for years, people who had christened his daughter and shared potluck dinners with his family. "Good morning," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the still room. "As Mr. Henderson said, I was helping to prepare the books for the audit." He passed out a single sheet of paper to each person at the table, the summary page. "What I found is a pattern of discrepancies between the amount of money recorded in the weekly collection ledgers and the amount of money deposited into the church's bank account." He let them absorb the single page. He saw Deacon Miller, a retired high school principal, frown as he read the numbers. He saw Sister Agnes, a nurse, put a hand to her mouth. "Let's start with one example," Terrell continued, his voice remaining level, devoid of emotion. He was simply a man reading a report. On August 11th, 2019, the usher's ledger recorded a total collection of $3,850. He slid a copy of the ledger sheet into the center of the table. The bank deposit slip for the following day, August 12th, shows a deposit of $3,100. He placed the copy of the deposit slip next to it. That is a difference of $750. The deposit slip was signed by Margaret Dubois. A gasp came from somewhere down the table. Margaret shot to her feet. "This is an outrage, a slander. It was a simple accounting error, I'm sure. How dare you twist a mistake into an accusation?" "Please, Margaret, sit down," Mr. Henderson said, his voice sharp. "Let him continue." Margaret remained standing, her chest heaving. "No, I will not sit here and be insulted by this nobody. Denise, are you going to let him do this to your own mother?" Denise looked from her mother to Terrell, her face a storm of confusion and horror. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was seeing the man she thought she knew transform into someone else entirely, someone calm, prepared, and holding a weapon she couldn't comprehend. Terrell ignored the outburst. He simply moved to the next set of documents. "On August 18th, 2019, he said, his voice cutting through the drama. "The ledger shows $4,200. The deposit shows $3,500, a difference of $700. The deposit slip was signed by Margaret Dubois." He continued, a relentless, methodical drumbeat of dates, numbers, and facts. With each new example, the atmosphere in the room grew colder, heavier. He laid out the evidence for September, for October, for the Christmas Eve service where the gap was over $1,500. He moved into the next year, his voice never wavering. He was a mail carrier delivering a series of registered letters, each one containing bad news, each one requiring a signature. Margaret had sunk back into her chair, her face ashen. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a painted mask. Denise was staring at her mother, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible understanding. The constant generosity, the new car down payments, the shopping sprees. A montage of memories was replaying in her mind, being recast in a sinister new light. Finally, Terrell reached the last page of his report. The pattern continues for 2 full years. The discrepancies are consistent. The total amount unaccounted for between January 2019 and December 2020 is $74,350. He closed the binder. The quiet click echoed in the profound silence of the room. "The evidence is in the folders before you," he said, finally looking up and meeting the eyes of the pastor. "I have nothing more to say." He sat back in his chair. He felt strangely empty, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away, leaving only a vast, quiet space. He had done it. He had delivered the truth. Now he just had to wait for the fallout. He risked a glance at his wife. Denise was no longer looking at him. She was staring at her mother, her expression one of utter devastation and betrayal. The foundation of her world had just been shattered, and the architect of that destruction was the very woman she had defended so fiercely. The strike was complete. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a cascade of collapses. Each one a direct consequence of the revelations in that conference room. The fallout for Margaret and Denise was swift, brutal, and public within the closed circle of their church community. First, there were the voicemails. They began less than an hour after Terrell left the church. He sat in his quiet living room, listening to them play, each one a station on Denise's journey from denial to devastation. Voicemail 1, Sunday, 11:32 a.m. "Terrell, what was that? What did you do? You ambushed us. Call me. You have embarrassed my mother. You have embarrassed me. We need to talk about this now." Her voice was sharp, angry, still clinging to the belief that this was a personal attack, not a legal proceeding. Voicemail 2, Sunday, 2:17 p.m. Okay, the deacons are meeting with Mama, alone. They won't let me in the room. "Terrell, maybe there were some mistakes. Mama handles a lot of cash. Things get mixed up. You know how she is. You didn't have to do it like that. You could have come to us privately. We could have fixed it." The anger was now laced with panic, the first cracks of justification appearing in her defense. Text message, Sunday, 6:04 p.m. They're asking for her to step down from all positions. The board, the fundraising committee, everything. They're talking about legal action. "Terrell, you have to fix this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." Voicemail 3, Monday, 9:16 a.m. "Terrell, please, pick up the phone. Please, don't do this to us, to our family. Think of Zora. What will people say? My mother, she's a good woman. She got confused with the numbers. She was going to pay it back. I know she was." The pleading was desperate now, a frantic attempt to rewrite history. Voicemail 4, Tuesday, 8:21 p.m. A long silence, then a ragged, choked sob. "I can't believe you did this," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You destroyed our family. You destroyed my mother. For what? A little bit of money? Was it worth it, Terrell? Was it worth destroying everything?" He saved the voicemails. Not out of cruelty, but as a record, a reminder of the blindness he had lived with for so long. The consequences for Margaret were enumerated with cold, administrative precision by the deacon board, who chose to handle the matter internally to avoid a public scandal that would tarnish the church's name. First, Margaret was forced to immediately resign from her position as treasurer emeritus and from her seat on the deacon board. Her name was quietly removed from the church letterhead within a week. Second, to avoid criminal charges, she was required to make full restitution. A legally binding agreement was drawn up by the church's lawyer. She had to repay the full $74,350 within 90 days. For a woman whose entire identity was built on the appearance of effortless wealth, this was a devastating blow. The only way she could access that amount of cash quickly was to take out a high-interest, $100,000 second mortgage on her beloved Guilford estate, de Chatsaurin West, the very house where she had demanded Terrell kneel. The marble floors were now collateral for her crime. Third, and perhaps most painfully for her, was the social annihilation. The news spread like wildfire through the tight-knit upper crust of the church community. The phone calls stopped. The invitations to galas and charity luncheons dried up. Her friends, the women in their Armani suits, treated her like a pariah. The shame was absolute and suffocating. She became a prisoner in her own $2.2 million mansion. For Denise, the consequences were a slow-motion demolition of the life she had taken for granted. Her primary source of income, her mother's seemingly bottomless generosity, was instantly cut off. The promised $10,000 down payment for a new BMW evaporated. Suddenly, her part-time $16 an hour receptionist job wasn't for pin money. It was her only source of income. She filed for divorce, as she had threatened. But the narrative she tried to spin of a cruel, vindictive husband fell apart in mediation. Terrell, calm and prepared as always, presented the timeline of events: his discovery, his wife's siding with her mother, the ultimatum. The mediator saw a man who had exposed a crime and a woman who had demanded he cover it up. When it came to custody of Zora, there was no contest. Denise was emotionally unstable, living in the home of a disgraced embezzler, and suddenly without financial means. Terrell, with his steady job, his stable home, and his unwavering focus on his daughter's well-being, was granted sole custody. Denise was forced to move out of her mother's mansion and into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of town, an apartment with a monthly rent of $1,100 that consumed most of her paycheck. Her dream of a luxury car was replaced by the harsh reality of a monthly bus pass. The life she had craved, the life of her mother, was revealed to be a hollow facade, and in its collapse, it had dragged her down into the rubble. Terrell had said nothing to her since that Sunday. He didn't need to. The consequences spoke for themselves. A year can change everything. The passage of 4 seasons in the Park Heights row house had been a quiet, healing balm. The silence left by Denise's departure had at first been a gaping wound, but slowly it had been filled by new sounds. More of Zora's laughter, the quiet clicking of chess pieces on a board, and the contented hum of a life rebuilt on a foundation of truth. Sunlight, warm and golden, streamed through the living room window on a bright Saturday afternoon in October. Terrell sat on the floor, the same spot where he had once painstakingly uncovered his mother-in-law's theft. But now, instead of legal pads and calculators, the floor was covered with Zora's school books and art supplies. At 8 years old, she was thriving. Her report cards were filled with stars, and the walls of their small home were a gallery of her increasingly sophisticated artwork. Terrell's life had found a new, simpler rhythm. His job as a postal carrier was the same. The $58,000 salary a steady, reliable anchor. But his life outside of the uniform had expanded. He kept his route, the familiar streets and faces, a source of comfort. But his weekends were now dedicated to Zora. Their new tradition was the Saturday Chess Club, held in a community garden in a nearby neighborhood. The garden itself was a symbol of their new life, a place of patient growth, where small, dedicated efforts yielded beautiful results. He was learning chess along with Zora, his methodical mind taking to the game's logic and strategy. He loved watching his daughter's brow furrow in concentration as she contemplated a move, her mind sharp and focused. It was at the chess club that he had met Aisha. She was a librarian who volunteered to run the club, a kind, intelligent woman with a quiet smile and eyes that held a gentle warmth. Her hair was styled in beautiful, intricate locks, and she had a laugh that made Terrell feel instantly at ease. They started talking, first about chess, then about books, then about life. There was no pressure, no agenda. It was just a slow, budding friendship that held the promise of something more, like a seed just beginning to sprout in the garden's rich soil. This particular Saturday, Zora came running to him, her face alight with excitement. She was holding a piece of paper. "Look, Daddy, I made a new one for our collection." She unfolded the drawing. It was a portrait of the two of them, standing in front of their row house. She had drawn him in his blue postal uniform and herself holding a chess piece, a queen. She had taken great care with the details. The most important detail was the crayon she had used for their skin. It was a deep, rich brown, applied with the firm pressure of certainty. Her own skin, his own skin, captured in wax. "That's me, and that's you," she said, pointing with a small finger. The beads on the ends of her braids clicked softly. "We're a family. You're the king, and I'm the queen." He felt a familiar prickle behind his eyes, a swell of emotion so powerful it almost took his breath away. He pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair which smelled of coconut oil and sunshine. This was it. This was everything. The arguments, the humiliation, the lonely nights. It had all led to this moment of pure, unassailable truth. This was true wealth. This was the treasure that could never be stolen, the dividend that paid out in pure love. He had seen Denise a few times. She picked Zora up for a supervised visit every other Sunday. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. The last time she had finally said the words he once thought he needed to hear. "I was wrong, Terrell," she'd said, not meeting his eyes. "About everything. I valued the wrong things. I'm sorry." He had nodded, accepting the apology not for her but for himself. It was the final closing of a door, a quiet acknowledgement of a life he had left behind. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Denise," he had said. And he meant it. Forgiveness wasn't for her comfort, it was for his peace. As he held his daughter, the drawing clutched in her hand, he thought about the nature of wealth. He had spent 10 years feeling inadequate because his worth was measured in dollars by people who had none of their own, but they were the poor ones, living in a gilded cage built on lies. His wealth was here in his arms. It was in the integrity of his work, the peace in his home, and the boundless love of his child. It was a wealth he had earned, not inherited or stolen, and it was more than enough. We all face moments where we must choose between a comfortable lie and a difficult truth. Terrell chose the truth, and while it cost him his marriage, it gave him back his self-respect and the freedom to build an authentic life. What do you think is the true measure of a person's wealth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories about finding strength in integrity.